Welcome into One of One Sports. It is time for our official playoff predictions. We're going to go through each of these first round matchups. If you've been following my channel, I did give like an initial prediction of how this will go down when the bracket first came out. But now I'm going to do a deep dive into each of these games. Now we have more information. And then at the end of the video, we'll see if anything for the further rounds has changed for me. So getting right into, well, not getting right into it. First, a recap of how we did on predictions this year. We went 99 and 50 overall, and in game breakdowns, which this video will be all game breakdowns, we went 57 and 18. Really good numbers there. And let's hope to keep the hot streak alive. We predicted every conference championship game correctly last week. Got Clemson beating SMU. Oregon, we predicted Georgia to win when not a lot of people did. So really happy with that. The non power conference championship games, excluding the Mountain West, so like the Tulane Armies, those ones struggled a little bit there, but didn't have as much to work with as I haven't seen those teams play as much. Every team in today's video I've seen multiple times this year, and yeah, I'll break it all down, give my insight, and see who I think should win these games. Starting off with the first game that's going to be taking place, the battle for Indiana. This is a Friday night matchup. It's going to be cold in South Bend. Notre Dame hosting, but it's not too far from Indiana. Obviously, in-state matchup, and this is a game. This one, maybe the one I'm most excited for of any of these, just because I feel like that Friday night atmosphere, that in-state kind of rivalry, even though it's not like a huge rivalry, I think you're going to sense it, and it's the debut for this new playoff format, which though I'm not the biggest fan of, I do think it's going to bring a lot of excitement. So maybe the game I'm most excited for. Getting into the keys to the game, I think the biggest key to the game in all of this is just how good is Indiana, right? Because they played one team that is ranked in the top 25 from the Big Ten. Didn't play anyone out of conference. Their best win, probably Michigan, who was a 7-5 team, and even they didn't perform that well against them. Didn't play at Penn State, didn't play in Oregon, or even in Illinois, didn't play in Iowa. And the one team they did play is Ohio State, and they did not perform the way they would like to, and obviously had their worst game of the year and their only loss of the year. Now, you could say similar things for Notre Dame, but we did see them play A&M and Georgia Tech and even Navy and Army, and we saw them play even USC, who's not the best team, but we know has talent, and we see Notre Dame beat Louisville. So there are tests that Notre Dame had, even if they're not the highest level of test. We don't even really have that for Indiana. So the Ohio State game, I'm not even saying Indiana's bad. The Ohio State game could have been a fluke, too big of a moment, right? And now they're ready, and they're actually a really good team. That could be it. But I'm just saying we don't know. And that's the biggest part of the game that is the hardest to predict, but it's the most important part. Is Indiana a really good team, or are they a good team that's able to beat inferior opponents, but when you take that next step up like they did in the Ohio State game, they're going to struggle. Second key to the game I have is the Indiana run defense. For Notre Dame, Jeremiah Love, he's a really, really good running back. And the O-line has improved a lot throughout the year, and it's a really good O-line. But as I've said with most Notre Dame prediction videos, I think I said this when I predicted them against USC and Army and Navy, probably when I did Louisville. Basically every game I've talked about the run defense of the other team, because if you can limit Jeremiah Love and Riley Leonard's rushing ability, then you force them to throw the ball, and we know that's the weak point of this offense. Riley Leonard, not the best passer in college football. He can make some mistakes. It's just that a lot of these teams have not been able to force Notre Dame to have to throw the ball. We'll see if Indiana can. Third thing I have here is the Indiana O-line, because I thought a lot of the outside of the special team struggles, which I think were their biggest issue against Ohio State, and I think those will be cleaned up. That seems a little bit flukish. I think their next biggest struggle was after the first few drives of the game. Their O-line did not hold up and give time for Curtis Rourke. You saw Jack Sawyer in the backfield a lot, Tui Malau, a lot of Ohio State defenders pressuring Rourke, and that really just disrupted this offense. So they've got to hold up for the whole game against a Notre Dame defense that is really good. Probably not going to be able to create as much pressure as that Ohio State defense could, but still a really good defense that'll test the Indiana O-line. And then finally, the Notre Dame secondary, because if Indiana's O-line does hold up, these receivers are quite good, And this Notre Dame secondary, even though you saw 2 pick sixes against USC at the end there, I thought USC showed this secondary is gettable. Their receivers can make big plays, and Indiana's receivers aren't quite as good as USC, but they're pretty good. They catch the back shoulder ball really well, and we've seen them have great performances throughout the year. So I think if Indiana's O-line can hold up, that's where Indiana could have a possible advantage. Who do I have winning this game? I do think Indiana's O-line will hold up better, and I think they'll put up points. I think this is going to be surprising people with how high scoring this game will be. I think people are expecting a lower scoring game. I think it's going to be not quite a shootout, but pretty high scoring. I just don't think Indiana will be able to stop the run either, and I think Notre Dame's defense will make maybe one more play. I think it's really tight, down to the wire, and I'm going Fighting Irish 31-28 to advance to play Georgia in the second round. The second game I have is going to be Clemson, Texas, and I'm looking forward to this one as well. And we get that Cade Klubnik, Quinn Ewers rematch that everyone's talking about from high school. And Texas, pretty big favorite here, considering Clemson just snuck in by winning the conference title. So Texas, not easily, but many people are going to predict Texas to win this game. And when I did my initial predictions, I did as well. And so for the keys to the game as to why, because I do think Texas is a favorite for a reason. So when I go through this, I kind of want to talk about what Clemson has to do to win this game. So first up, Cade Klubnik. He has to play one of his better performances, right? He's a good player. He's not a great player, but he can have great performances, and I think that's what he needs to do. I think he needs to be really precise throwing the ball downfield, and I think he needs to use his legs, get outside the pocket, make throws on the run, pick up, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 6 with his legs if everything's not there. And I think he's got to have a performance worthy of, his high school recruiting billing. He's got to have that level of game, and I think he's capable of it, but he hasn't always done it. Got to have a big game going back to Texas. Second, I think their run game has to really support Cade, because when this run game's not there, they're really reliant on deep shots down the field. But this Texas defense is maybe the best in the country at stopping explosive plays. So if the run game's not there, they can focus even more on explosive plays. Now those won't be there. This Clemson offense not good at operating in really the underneath part of the field, and they could really stall and not produce much on offense. And this is the part I'm most concerned about, because last time we saw Phil Maffa, he didn't look great. Their backup running back, I think it's Haynes is his name. I'm forgetting off the top of my head. He got injured as well, though. I think Adam Haynes might be his name. But yeah, he was injured. So maybe Maffa could still be banged up. And this Texas defense really good against the run, really good overall. So this is the part I'm most concerned about, is the run game won't be there. And then you take away the deep threats, and this Clemson offense just won't be able to score. Third, I think this Clemson secondary is, because their pass rush is really good. I like their linebackers a lot as well. In the secondary, you have talented guys in Terrell, even a Lucas, a Barnes. There are talented guys in that secondary, but they haven't always been, I don't know, because they've been good, but I feel like at times they've just been a weaker point of this offense and can allow some bigger plays. And when you look at Texas, with the receivers they have in Bond and Golden, and even like the freshman Wingo or Moore are really fast, can make big plays. We saw him do it against Georgia. Quinn Ewers, if given time, can be really accurate, and the O-line gives him time. At least, like, your pass rush is good, but it won't win every time against this Texas O-line. So when Quinn Ewers has time, you're going to have to hold up against some really good receivers. That's another thing I'm concerned about personally. And then the final thing I mentioned is this Texas O-line, because I do think it will come down how many times do you hold off a Peter Woods or a TJ Parker, probably the best pass rusher from the ACC. Because if you're winning that matchup, like if it's 50-50, I think for Clemson, you got to win that matchup at least 60% of the time. Not like you're getting a sack or even a QB hit, but you're causing enough disruption where Quinn Ewers can't just stand there and wait for his receiver to beat your guys in the secondary. You got to win that matchup more often than not if you're Clemson. So for this Texas O-line, and Kelvin, and I forgot to even mention this yet, Kelvin Banks didn't play in the Georgia game. Believe he'll be playing in this game. And This O-line with Kelvin Banks back, you would think would play better than they did in that Georgia game. So another huge factor there. And overall, I do think Texas has the edge in a lot of areas. I think Clemson will keep it competitive just because there's a lot of talent on the roster. And Texas throughout the season hasn't pulled away from teams. Even when they beat like Arkansas, Kentucky, those were still close. So I expect a close game where Clemson's always within grasp, but that defense just can't make enough plays against this really good Texas defense. And I'm going Longhorns to win it 24-16. Our third college football playoff matchup is SMU taking on Penn State. And it's not going to be in my keys to the game, but I think this is the one where home field probably the biggest advantage. Like Clemson traveling to Texas, yes, that's important, but a lot of Clemson players from Texas, I think you may even play better because you're going back home, especially guys like Bryant Wesco, Cade Klubnik, and then we talked about earlier Indiana, Notre Dame, in-state thing. And then I'll talk about Tennessee, Ohio State after this, but I don't really know how that's going to go. Penn State, team from Texas, going up to what's going to be like a freezing environment. And Penn State, we know how good of a home field advantage they can be. Not a night game, but still, I believe they're doing a whiteout, which is going to disrupt SMU, you would think, at least a little bit. So not in my keys to the game, but wanted to mention it on the front end. Now we can get into the keys to the game, and the biggest one is this SMU run defense. I was super, super impressed by what Penn State did to Oregon in the conference championship game, with what Nick Singleton and Katron Allen were able to do, and even Drew Aller a little bit. Going for, I think, over 200 yards on the ground, may have been close to 300 actually, was super impressive and something I did not see coming at all. And SMU, this isn't really how it works, but like I'm in my head, I'm like, okay, SMU doesn't have as good of a run defense as Oregon, I don't think. So I would think Penn State can run the ball pretty well again. That opens up things in the passing game for Tyler Warren, for other receivers to step up, and it can be kind of like a snowball effect from there. But if this SMU run defense could surprise me a little bit, stop this Penn State run, and now you're relying solely on Drew Aller as opposed to giving him a supplementary run game. Now you've thrown this like a crowbar in the bicycle. Oh man, I can't talk. Throwing the crowbar in the bicycle wheels, and the whole offense could slow down there, or come to a halt. I mean, so that's interesting to think about there. And a little bit, furthering that is if SMU can stop the run, they're one of the best pass rush teams in the country. So now you give your edge rushers a chance to get home, pressure Drew Aller, maybe make some mistakes. Another thing to look at, but it all starts from their run defense, and if they're going to stop the run. That's the biggest matchup of this whole game is SMU's interior D-line and run-stopping ability against this Penn State O-line and their really great backs in Singleton and Allen. Next, Penn State peaking, and I'm not sure they are, but that Oregon game I thought was the best game they played all year, and this is the time of the year where you want to be playing your best games, and there's a chance they're doing that because Oregon, I think, probably the best team in the country. Obviously, they're ranked number one. Didn't lose all year. And I know Penn State, that was one of their only 2 losses. But to me, most impressive game of the year considering what they did on the ground, the plays they made on offense to keep up with Oregon. Yes, the defense struggled, but Oregon's just so electric offensively that I'm not really concerned about that. There's not a lot of teams that have a Tez Johnson and a Kenyon Sadiq and an Evan Stewart and a Jordan James and a Dylan Gabriel with that O-line to make the kind of plays Oregon was making. There's maybe no other team in the country that can replicate what Oregon did against this Penn State defense. So if Penn State's peaking, you look at this SMU matchup, they just lost as well. Penn State lost as well, but they didn't seem to be playing their best football. So maybe an advantage there for Penn State. Third, I think this talent advantage is sizable, and maybe it doesn't end up mattering, but it's at least something you got to look at. Penn State, not like the most talented team, but they clearly recruit better than SMU. And even if you just look at the star players, Drew Aller, 5-star recruit. Nick Singleton, 5-star recruit. Abdul Carter, very high-level recruit. Can't remember if he was 5-star. Denny Sutton, 5-star. The secondary's loaded. You got Kobe King there as well. And across the board, it's just a higher level of player than SMU has. And that's why, Penn State is favored. And that's why a lot of people think they win this game, is really just looking at the talent advantage. Maybe it doesn't end up mattering because SMU has a lot of speed on their team, maybe even more speed than Penn State has, that can kind of counteract that just pure like athletic edge in terms of like strength and all the other stuff. But the talent edge is there for Penn State, and I do think it could play a factor. Fourth and finally, this Penn State pass rush, they have studs there. Abdul Carter, I think is projected to probably be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. I know at one point I saw he's projected number 1 by ESPN. I haven't checked the updates in a little bit, but I'm sure he's still projected top 10. He's a great pass rusher. And Denise, I'm saying his name wrong, aren't I? I think it's Denai Sutton, is a really good pass rusher as well. And I saw what I think Clemson probably had the best pass rush SMU had faced this year. I would say with a guy like TJ Parker and Peter Woods there. And TJ Parker was very disruptive. Abdul Carter, also that caliber of player. And Denai Sutton complements him very well. I think his pass rush could really disrupt Kevin Jennings and this SMU offense, coached by Rhett Lashley. So who do I have winning? Well, I do think SMU will be more competitive than people expect and keep it close for a while. But I think over 4 quarters of a football game, Penn State's talent advantage will start to show. You'll start to lean on them a little bit more. That run game, I think they might stop it early, but over time, you start to see the runs breaking, Singleton playing better, Allen playing better, and kind of just wearing down this SMU defense. And I think it ends up being 27-21 Penn State. And I think for a while it'll be a low-scoring game, and then the scoring picks up a little bit. And I think SMU probably scores late to cut it. I don't think it's like this isn't a 27-21 where I think SMU has the ball to win, if that makes sense. It was really specific for a score prediction. But finally, Tennessee, Ohio State, and this is probably the most, what would you say? Because it's probably not my most anticipated game, but a lot of people's most anticipated game is this matchup. It's the 8 versus the 9. I think probably the closest point spread of any of the first round matchups. Probably the 2 teams closest in talent level, probably. And both really good teams that I think people would say have a chance to go all the way in this tournament if things break right for them and a few things click correctly. So keys to the game, I've got Ohio State morale, just because when you lose a game like the game they lost to Michigan, in the fashion they lost, all the emotion that builds to that game, your season builds to that game. Ryan Day he's talked about how much that game means and the reaction your players had to losing that game. Are you able to just play another game after that and just like nothing ever happened, or do you come out like is your team kind of lost? That's something I would be concerned about, something I am concerned about for Ohio State. I'm a Michigan fan, so this is kind of weird. But second is the Ohio State O-line. It's been a problem for most of the year after the injuries started piling up. And we saw against Michigan that the Michigan D-line got the better of them. And I think some other teams have as well. And the O-line hasn't been bad the whole year. They had some games where they really stepped up. I thought the Penn State game, they gave a better performance than I thought they would. So they could definitely do that here. But when your Tennessee's D-line is one of the best units in the country, James Pierce, one of the better edge rushers in the country, and certainly could give this Ohio State O-line problems. And I think if you were projecting, the Tennessee D-line has the advantage in this matchup. So that's something, again, to worry about for the Ohio State side. Something Tennessee might be concerned about is their secondary, which, yes, it's played well, but who has had the ability to test them? I would say your 2 biggest tests were probably Alabama and Georgia. And Georgia's receivers, I thought, had opportunities where they dropped the ball. And then the second half, it kind of got going more. And Carson Beck played pretty well. So that's a data point. And then Alabama, you pretty much shut down. But I did think that was a little bit of a problem. Jalen Milroe playing one of his worst games of the year. Now you could say you were the reason for that. So that's just another data point. Ohio State will have the best receivers Tennessee has seen all year. It's simple as that. Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, and Emeka Egbuka, it's the best set of receivers. Will Howard, not the best quarterback they've seen. So if you can disrupt the O line, get to Will Howard, especially like kind of what Michigan did, right? We saw Will Howard make some costly interceptions, some bad reads, and he's certainly a guy who will make a mistake. But if given time and the receivers are getting open, which they likely will, if he has time in the pocket, you can only cover these receivers for so long. I'm not sure if this Tennessee secondary is meant to hold up long enough if that Ohio State O line plays well. So those two keys kind of tie together directly. And then our final key is going to be Nico Iamaleava versus Will Howard. Really, really different quarterbacks here and keys to the game for really different reasons. Nico, he's so talented. You can see how he could like next year be even like the first round pick in the NFL draft if he puts this all together. I mean, the big arm, he can run. It's just all there, right? But he hasn't the talent hasn't matched the on-field production. But you see the glimpses, right? And at any moment he can have a game or moments in a game where he changes it because he uses that talent in the best way. And he can be this X factor in this college football playoff, kind of like you think of a college basketball run where a player gets hot. If Nico gets hot, Tennessee can win this whole thing. They definitely can. And Will Howard, it's not like that at all. He's not this immensely talented guy. He's a guy you want to manage the game, make enough plays with his legs, maybe on some key critical downs, read the defense well, hit your receivers when open, and just be enough of a threat to allow for your running backs to make plays, your super skill receivers to make plays. He is that game manager role. But what you can't have is him doing what he did in the Michigan game with those 2 interceptions where you can't trust him. What he did early in the Penn State game with the pick 6. What he did in the Oregon game, that slide and not recognizing time and situation in the game. He can't make those kind of mistakes. He's a veteran guy. He can't be making the mistakes he's made in a lot of the biggest games this year. So that's where he has to step up. And that's why these two quarterbacks are huge keys to the game, though for very different reasons. So who am I taking? This was, I will say, the toughest game for me to pick because I don't know how Ohio State is going to respond in this matchup. They could come out with their head on fire and play maybe the best game of the year, or it could come out completely flat, and it's just so hard for me to predict. Ultimately, this Tennessee offense is something I've seen struggle too much this year, and they're playing such a good defense where I don't trust Nico to break out. So that's why I'm leaning close win for Ohio State. Give me Buckeyes 27-24. And this was the hardest one. I could so easily switch this by the time the game happens. It's so tough to pick. Now moving on. So this is what the bracket would look like based on my predictions. Starting off, Oregon, Ohio State. They played this year before. Oregon won. Really tight game. I think Oregon's improved since then. I think Ohio State has not. I think they're worse along the line of scrimmage. Don't trust them against Oregon's pass rush. Dillon Gabriel, I think, significant quarterback edge. The receivers just as good as Ohio State's and can expose Ohio State's secondary more, in my opinion. I like Oregon in this matchup to win it. Then ASU, Texas. As much as I want to root for ASU, Cam Skattebo in this matchup, I think Texas, too talented, would limit the run game and slow down this ASU offense a lot. I don't think it'd be a blowout. I think it'd be like a lot of Texas games this year. A 10-point win, low scoring 24-14, something like that. I'd have Longhorns. Boise State, Penn State. This was one I kind of wanted to pick like a big upset. Boise State advance. Ashton Jeanty have a big game. But I do think, again, the talent edge too big, and I think they could stop the run if they're Penn State against Boise. Not sure Boise can do the same against them. And like I said, I think Penn State's playing some of their best football. So I've got Penn State advancing, a lot of chalk, and I don't feel great about that, but it's just hard for me to see some upsets. Next up, Georgia Notre Dame. This is a tough one because I don't expect Carson Beck to be playing, and although Gunnar Stockton came in, Georgia came from behind to win that game. I'm not sure I trust him, and maybe he's better than Carson Beck. I wouldn't, you know, wait. I saw Joe Klatt the other day saying if Gunnar Stockton was the better option, he would have been playing. I don't think that's true at all, especially when you consider Kirby Smart's history with quarterbacks. He will play a guy who's not as good, and just stay committed to that guy. We've seen it in the past, and we know other teams have done this as well. So there's a chance Gunnar Stockton's better. But what I saw from the Texas matchup is that they were not ready for a quarterback to beat them with the legs the way Gunnar Stockton could. And I'm not sure his throwing ability definitely didn't look on par with Beck's. So I expect a tight defensive battle against Notre Dame, something like 20-13. But I think they'll also stop Notre Dame's run game. Riley Leonard, not the best passer either. And Georgia will do the thing that I think a lot of teams haven't been able to do against Notre Dame, which is force them to throw. Low scoring, Georgia win, continuing the chalk. So my semifinals would be Oregon, Texas, Penn State, Georgia. I think Oregon would Texas's defense has been able to stop pretty much everyone, but this Oregon offense is going to get theirs. They're just too explosive. Gabriel gets the ball out too quick. The receivers are too talented. The O-line holds up too well. And your Jordan James is one of the better running backs in the country. Oregon would win this. Texas can't keep up offensively. And then Penn State, Georgia. Though I said Penn State's playing their best football, I think Georgia, too talented. Maybe Beck's back. Maybe he's not. But even with Stockton, I think Georgia would run the ball. I think they're athletes. And Kirby Smart, better coach in such a big game. It's like James Franklin never wins big games. I don't think suddenly he's going to win a ton of them in a row. So the coaching edge is there. The athlete edge is there. Georgia just wins this style of game. I've got Georgia, Oregon in the national title. Dan Lanning versus Kirby Smart. And I'm kind of upset if this happens because, I'll do a reaction video soon to what my preseason predictions were. And when I scripted that, right, originally, before I looked at all the schedules, right, I had Oregon, Georgia. Then when I went through the schedules and did the seeding, it ended up being a semifinal matchup because it was impossible. So I ended up picking Oregon, Alabama, which obviously Alabama missed out on the playoff. So I'll be a little bit upset if this happens, just because I should have picked it and it just, switched it kind of at the end. But I digress. And when I'm picking this game, I think back to when Oregon played Georgia a few years ago in one of Dan Lanning's first games when he had Bo Nix, and they got absolutely annihilated. And in the post-game press conference, Kirby Smart said something along the lines of, he'll never admit it, but we just have better players. And it was true. Oregon did not have as good of players as Georgia. But now they do. And that's gonna be that way for a while, but it's this year Oregon has better players than Georgia. They have the better quarterback, even if Beck's healthy, but definitely if he's not. Dylan Gabriel was a Heisman finalist. I think Jordan James, probably the better running back, but maybe you disagree, but I would say Jordan James and the Oregon running back group has been better than Georgia's. I think Oregon's O-line has been better than Georgia's. Oregon's O-line was a finalist for the Joe Moore Award. These receivers are no doubt better than Georgia's, who consistently struggle with drops. Meanwhile, Oregon has guys like Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, who are among the best in the country. Even the tight ends, which is one of Georgia's strengths on offense, Oregon's are probably just as good. Then you look at the defensive side of the ball. Georgia maybe has better athletes, but the Oregon edge rush with Birch and Uiagalelei, and you've got depth there as well. And then Derek Harmon in the middle. This is a better edge rush group and a better interior than Georgia's. And you look at the secondary, Oregon's talented there too. Across the board, Oregon now has better players than Georgia. So though Kirby Smart was able to beat Dan Lanning the first time, he won't be able to do it again. The Oregon Ducks, been the best team all year. They will be your 2024-2025 national champions. That is it for today's video. I thank you for watching. If you got to the end of this video, you had to have enjoyed it. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and make sure to comment down below. Let me know who do you have winning these 4 matchups coming up, and who is your prediction to win the national championship. Once again, I thank you for watching. Until next time.